There are some doors we never open. We live our lives, we build our homes, and we tell ourselves that everything we need, everything that matters, is right here in the rooms we inhabit. But what if one of those closed doors, one of those locked-away spaces, held the key to a past you never knew you had? It was a cold, quiet night when the first odd thing happened. My name is Arthur, and I'm a man who lives by routine. Every Tuesday, I water the ferns in the living room. Every Friday, I get takeout from the same Chinese place. For years, my life was a peaceful, predictable rhythm, and I liked it that way. I lived in an old, three-story house that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had built it, my father had been born in it, and now it was mine. It was a beautiful house, with tall windows and hardwood floors that creaked with 1,000 memories. But it also had an attic, a dark, dusty space at the very top of the house that I had never once dared to enter. My parents had always said it was full of old junk and best left alone. I was a dutiful son, so I left it alone. This house was my sanctuary, and after my wife, Clara, passed away a few years ago, it became my whole world. The silence was sometimes heavy, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the ghosts of happy memories. That night, however, the silence was broken. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible scratching from somewhere above. I froze, my hand hovering over the kettle. Sounded like a mouse, maybe. An old house is bound to have a few uninvited guests. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. But then, it came again, louder this time. A distinct, rhythmic tap-tap-tap, like someone was trying to send a message. I looked up at the ceiling, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. The sound was coming from the attic. I had never heard a sound from up there before. It was a sealed-off part of the house, a forgotten room. The scratching stopped, and a wave of relief washed over me. I'm just being paranoid, I thought. I poured my tea, my hands shaking slightly. Then the sound changed. It wasn't a scratching anymore. It was a muffled, almost tuneless humming. A human humming. I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the impossible. Someone was in my attic. The thought sent a cold dread down my spine. Who could it be? I had locked all the doors, all the windows. The attic itself was accessed by a small, wooden ladder that folded down from the ceiling in the upstairs hallway. The latch was high up, and I knew for a fact it was bolted shut. I told myself it must be the wind, or my mind playing tricks. But the humming continued, a low, melancholy tune that felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. My first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped me, a deep, unsettling curiosity. I needed to know. I needed to see for myself. I went into the upstairs hallway and looked up at the ceiling. The small, unassuming square of what seemed to be staring back at me. I stood on a chair, fumbled with the latch, and with a groan of old wood, the ladder creaked down. A cloud of dust billowed out, and the stale air of the forgotten attic filled the hallway. I felt a surge of fear, but also a strange sense of purpose. I had to know what was up there. Climbing the ladder was a strange, almost surreal experience. Each rung was covered in a thick layer of dust. As my head emerged into the darkness of the attic, a musty, forgotten smell hit me. A scent of mothballs, old paper, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was colder up there than in the rest of the house. I flipped on the light switch, and the single bare bulb cast a weak, yellow glow over the room. The space was filled with old trunks, forgotten furniture covered in white sheets, and 100 years of memories I had never known. But in the center of the room, there was something that didn't belong. A small cot, neatly made, with a worn blanket folded at the foot. And sitting on the cot, her back to me, was a woman. She was old, with a mane of wild, silver hair that tumbled down her back. She was humming the same tune I had heard from downstairs. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I cleared my throat, and she stopped humming, her shoulders tensing. Slowly, she turned around. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were a startling, vibrant blue. They looked at me with an expression that wasn't fear, but something closer to recognition. Arthur, she said, her voice a soft, dry rasp. It's been a long time. I didn't know her. I was sure of it. I had never seen her before in my life. I was about to ask her who she was, how she knew my name, when she did something that made the blood run cold in my veins. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and pointed to an old, wooden rocking horse sitting in the corner. You were always so afraid of that horse, she said. You used to call it Mr. Ed, my childhood rocking horse. My parents had told me they'd given it away years ago. And Mr. Ed, only a handful of people in my entire life had ever heard me call it that. It was a secret, a silly name from my childhood, something I had long since forgotten. But this strange woman, this woman living in my attic, knew. She knew. And at that moment, I knew this wasn't just some strange woman who had broken into my house. This was something else entirely. Something far, far more terrifying. She knew my secrets, my deepest, most buried secrets. And she was living in the one place in my house I had never dared to enter. The place where all the old things were kept. The place where the past was buried. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Mr. Ed. The name echoed in my head like a ghost. I stumbled back a step, the latter feeling suddenly very far away. Who are you? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. How do you know that? She didn't answer right away. She simply looked at me, those piercing blue eyes holding a century of secrets. I've been here a long time, Arthur, she said, her voice gentle, almost melodic. Longer than you think. She gestured to the cot beside her. Won't you sit? I shook my head, my fear overriding any sense of politeness. Couldn't sit. I couldn't even stand still. My eyes darted around the attic, searching for a logical explanation. A hidden passage? A secret entrance? But there was nothing. Just dust, cobwebs, and memories I didn't recognize. Who are you? I repeated, my voice stronger this time, laced with an edge of desperation. What are you doing here? She smiled again, and this time, the smile was tinged with a deep, profound sadness. I was always here, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In a way, this was always my room. My room? The words hit me like a physical blow. This was my house, my family's house. I had spent my entire life thinking I knew every inch of it. But this woman was telling me a different story. She then pointed to a small, ornate wooden box on a trunk near her. Do you remember the night you broke your arm, Arthur? She asked. The question caught me completely off guard. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. I had been climbing the big oak tree in the backyard, trying to impress my friend, Mark. I'd fallen and broken my arm in 2 places. It was a painful, formative memory. How could you possibly know about that? I asked, my voice trembling. You were so brave, she continued, ignoring my question. You didn't cry. You just sat on the ground and held your arm, waiting for your mother to come. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if reliving the memory. I was so proud of you. I was watching the whole time. Watching the whole time. The words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. It wasn't just a single event she knew about. It was a pattern. She had been watching me my entire life. From my own attic. I felt a sense of profound violation, of my most private moments being observed by a stranger. But she wasn't a stranger. She was something far more unnerving. She knew me. She knew the boy I was, the boy no one else remembered. The time your father lost his job, she said, her eyes now open and fixed on me. Do you remember that? Of course I did. My father, a proud and stoic man, had been a wreck. The house had been filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. My parents had argued behind closed doors, their whispers carrying through the thin walls. He went into the shed in the garden and just sat there for hours, she said, her voice a hushed whisper. He was so afraid he couldn't provide for his family. I wanted to go down and tell him it would be okay, but I couldn't. Tears welled up in my eyes. How did she know that? My father had never, not once, spoken of that moment. I had been a little boy, but I had seen the pain in his eyes. I had never told anyone. It was a secret I had held close to my heart for a lifetime. And yet, this woman, this ghost in my attic knew. "And your mother?" she continued, her voice soft with a tenderness that broke my heart. "She was a magnificent woman. She used to bake those incredible apple pies. The whole house would smell of cinnamon and sugar. But you always wanted the crust, didn't you? She'd sneak you an extra piece when your father wasn't looking." A small, sad smile played on her lips. "I used to love watching you eat it. Your face would light up." The memories, long buried and forgotten, came flooding back. The taste of my mother's apple pie. The flaky, buttery crust I loved so much. The way she'd smile a conspiratorial smile and hand me a small, extra piece. It was an intimate, beautiful moment between a mother and son. A moment no one else could have possibly known about. Who was she? Was she a spirit? A ghost? Or something else entirely? I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. She didn't look like a ghost. She looked like a woman who had lived a long, hard life. A life spent in this attic, watching my life unfold below. A life spent in silence, a silent witness to my childhood, my family, and my most private moments. "I need to know," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "Please, tell me who you are." She picked up the small wooden box, her hands trembling slightly. "I am the secret of this house, Arthur," she said, her voice barely audible. "And the story of why I'm here is a story you have to be ready to hear. A story that will change everything you think you know about your family, about your life." She paused, her eyes locking with mine, and the profound sadness in them deepened. "A story that started with your father." My father. The words hung in the air like a pall, heavy and suffocating. A chill that had nothing to do with the cool attic air crept over me. Everything I thought I knew about my father, his stoicism, his unwavering sense of honor, his quiet love for my mother and me, was suddenly called into question. "What about my father?" I asked, my voice a tense whisper. "What do you mean?" The woman, whose name I still didn't know, held the wooden box in her lap. She traced the intricate carvings on its lid with a gnarled finger, her gaze distant, as if she were looking into a different time. "Your father was a man of great secrets, Arthur," she began, her voice a low murmur. "And he kept them buried here, in this house, in this room." She slowly opened the box. Inside, there wasn't a glimmer of gold or a cache of jewels. Instead, there were a handful of faded photographs, a small, intricate locket, and a diary with a worn leather cover. I felt a surge of disbelief. My father wasn't a man who kept a diary. He was a man who worked with his hands, who built things, who believed in action over words. This couldn't be his. She picked up a photograph and held it out to me. My hands shook as I took it. It was an old, black and white photo, creased and yellowed with age. It showed a young man and a young woman sitting together on a porch swing. The man was undoubtedly my father, though he was so young, so full of a bright-eyed joy I had never seen on his face. He was laughing, his arm around the woman. The woman was beautiful, with long, dark hair and a radiant smile. Her eyes, they were the same startling blue as the woman in the attic. My breath caught in my throat. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Her name was Eleanor," the old woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "And she was my sister." My heart hammered against my ribs. My father, and this woman's sister? A sister I had never heard of. A sister who looked so much like the woman who had been living in my attic. I felt a dizzying wave of disorientation, as if the ground beneath my feet had just given way. "They were in love," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Deeply, passionately in love. He was building this house for them. It was going to be their home, their life together." My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. If my father was in love with this woman, Eleanor, then where did my mother fit in? My mother, the woman I loved and respected, the woman who had given me a life filled with warmth and love. The thought of my father betraying her, of a secret life, was a gut punch. "Then the war came," the old woman said, her voice dropping to a somber tone. He was drafted. He promised he would come back for her. But when he did, he wasn't the same man. He was broken, and he had a secret. He was already married. To your mother. A sharp, searing pain shot through me. My father, married to my mother, while still in love with another woman. The betrayal, the deceit, the raw emotional weight of it was overwhelming. But there was still a missing piece. But why are you here? I asked, pointing a trembling finger at the cot. What happened to Eleanor? And why have you been living here all this time? The woman's gaze fell to the diary in the box. Eleanor, she had a secret of her own, she said, her voice full of a heartbreaking sorrow. She was pregnant with your father's child. The world tilted. My father, a secret child. My mind reeled. I looked around the attic at the forgotten toys, the dusty trunks. Was I the secret child? No, that didn't make sense. The woman in the photo was Eleanor, not my mother. She opened the diary to a marked page. Your father, when he returned, was torn. He loved my sister, but he had a new life. A life with your mother, who he also deeply cared for. He couldn't leave her. He felt a duty to her. But he couldn't leave Eleanor either. Not with a child on the way. She took a deep breath, the ancient story pouring from her. So he came up with a plan. A cruel, desperate plan. He told my sister that he was going to take the baby and raise it as his own. He would pretend it was a premature birth, a child he had with your mother. And my sister, she was so in love with him, so desperate to keep his secret and their child safe, that she agreed. She agreed to give up her baby, her flesh and blood, to be raised by another woman. She agreed to give her child a better life, a life with a father who loved them, but with a mother who wasn't her. My stomach churned with a nauseating mix of horror and disbelief. My father had stolen a baby, his own child, from the woman he loved. And what about my mother? Was she complicit? Did she know? Your mother knew nothing, the old woman said, as if reading my thoughts. She was a good woman, a kind woman, but she was naive. She was so in love with your father that she believed everything he told her. She believed the story of the premature birth. And she loved that child with all her heart. A child she believed was her own. And where was Eleanor all this time? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman's hand tightened around the diary. Eleanor. She couldn't leave. She couldn't bear to be far from her child. So she hid. She came to this house, to this attic, and she stayed. She watched her child grow up. From a distance. From the shadows. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. She was the woman in the attic, Arthur. She was the one who saw you fall from the tree. The one who watched you with your mother's apple pie. The one who loved you more than anything in the world. The truth, a long-buried, terrible truth, hit me with the force of a tidal wave. This woman, the woman with the shocking blue eyes, wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a ghost. She was my biological aunt. And my mother, my real mother, had lived her entire life in this attic, watching me from the shadows. The very mother I had thought had passed away years ago, the woman who had held me as a baby and sung me to sleep, wasn't my mother at all. She was a different kind of mother, a mother who had sacrificed everything for me, a mother who had lived a life of silent suffering, a life lived in a forgotten room, so I could have a life of comfort and love. The woman in the attic looked at me, her blue eyes now filled with a well of unspeakable sadness. Eleanor, she passed away a few years ago, she said, her voice trembling, right here in this room, and she asked me to come to finish her watch, to make sure you were okay, and to tell you the truth when the time was right. I stood there, surrounded by the dust and shadows of the attic, the final pieces of a life-shattering puzzle falling into place. My whole existence, every memory I had, every person I thought I knew, was a lie built on a foundation of unspoken secrets and profound sacrifice. The woman sitting on the cot, my aunt, was a living testament to a love story and a tragedy that had played out right beneath my feet, in this very house. My mother, Eleanor, had given up her life for mine, and the woman who raised me, the woman I called mother, had unknowingly raised another woman's child, with a love so pure and unconditional it defied belief. Why? I finally managed to whisper, the word a small, broken sound in the vast silence. Why did my father do this? Why didn't he just tell her? Tell me? My aunt, whose name was Sarah, closed the diary and placed it back in the box. Your father was a product of his time, Arthur, she said, her voice filled with a weary understanding. He was a man who felt the weight of duty and social expectations more than anything. He couldn't bear the shame of a child born out of wedlock. And he couldn't bear to hurt your mother either. He loved them both in his own way. He was a good man, but a deeply flawed one. He made a terrible choice, and he lived with the consequences, the guilt, for the rest of his life. He built this attic room for Eleanor. It was his way of keeping her close, of providing for her without anyone knowing. It was a prison for her, and a silent penance for him. I thought of my father, a quiet, serious man who always seemed to carry a burden I couldn't understand. The guilt, it must have been an unbearable weight. And my mother, the woman who had no idea of the secret that lived above her head. How could she have been so oblivious? Or was she? The question hung in the air, a new and unsettling thought. And your mother, the woman who raised you, Sarah continued, her eyes now gentle and compassionate. She was a saint. She loved you with a ferocity that was almost painful to watch. She was a mother in every way that mattered. She gave you her life, her love, her very soul. Eleanor knew that. That's why she stayed. Because she saw you were being raised by a good woman. A woman who would give you everything she couldn't. The tears finally came, hot and stinging, blurring my vision. They were tears of grief for Eleanor, the mother I never knew, who had spent her life in silent devotion. Tears of anger at my father for his terrible, selfish choice. And tears of profound, overwhelming love for the woman who raised me, the woman who had given me a love that was 1,000 times more real than any biological connection. Sarah stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over to the rocking horse, Mr. Ed, and ran a hand over its dusty mane. Eleanor loved that horse, she said softly. She used to watch you play with it. It was one of the few things she had left from her life before this attic. A small window into the world she had given up for you. I looked at the rocking horse, a forgotten toy, now imbued with a new, heartbreaking significance. It was a monument to a life, a mother, and a love I had never known. The attic wasn't just a room full of junk. It was a tomb, a memory box, a living history of a family's deepest secret. And I was the secret, the living embodiment of my father's greatest sin and 2 women's greatest love. What now? I asked, my voice raw. What do I do with this? Sarah looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. You live, Arthur, she said, her voice firm. You live the life they both wanted for you, a life of happiness, of love. You don't let this secret consume you. You honor them. You honor your real mother, Eleanor, by living the life she sacrificed for you. And you honor the woman who raised you by remembering the love she gave you. They both gave you a gift, a life. It's up to you to live it fully. As I descended the ladder, leaving the attic and the ghosts within, I knew my life would never be the same. The house, once my sanctuary, was now a place of profound and tragic history. But it was also a place of immense love. A love so powerful it had spanned generations, sacrificed for my sake, and waited in the shadows to be found. I would never forget the woman in the attic, the woman who knew too much about my childhood. And I would never forget the 2 women who, in their own ways, had loved me more than life itself. And that's the story, a story of 2 mothers, a haunted house, and a secret that lived for decades. A story that reminds us that sometimes the past isn't behind us. It's right above our heads. So I want to ask you, what secrets are hiding in your own homes? Are there things you've been afraid to look at, or doors you've been afraid to open? Think about it. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales like it, please give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel to get more stories delivered right to you, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you'll never miss a new video. Your support means the world, and it helps me continue to share these incredible and often unbelievable stories.